Welcome to Turek Books Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm your host, Joshua Turek. We're never going to read all the books we want, but when someone tells us about a book, that's its own valid form of experiencing it. Our guests come in to talk about the books that left lasting marks on them as readers, and that becomes a springboard to who they are, who I am, and maybe who all of us are. So sit back, relax, and enjoy it. And who knows, maybe you'll end up grabbing a book or two. Maybe you've read some of them, and it's nice to hear someone else talk about them. We want this to be like a book club, but without the guilt. Thank you for listening to another episode of Turek Books Podcast. If you could remember to like or rate or do whatever you can on the app that you're listening on, that does help allegedly, so that'd be nice. I'm so excited for our guest today. He's a surfer, a comedian, a comedy club co-owner, a bar co-owner,
Sure.
and my friend, Mr. Chris Gorbos.
Hi, Josh.
How you doing?
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Were you laughing at my code switch to my radio voice or something?
I mean, a little. I was just laughing at that, the somberness of the starting of like the cry in the dark of please do whatever you can on this podcast to make it better because we're all doing that today. Really,
that's all I ask. Yeah. Just help me lift this rock up the hill or whatever. Whatever it is they do. How you doing?
I'm doing really well.
Yeah.
Really excited to be in the midst of the summer. Everything's humming along, kind of in the flow of life right now, and happy to be here. Everything's pretty good. How are you doing?
Yeah, doing well. You and I go way back.
We do.
Through comedy. I always love what you have to say. We've hung out in a lot of different facets.
That's true.
We've gone surfing together.
We have gone surfing together.
You're a regular.
You're like an auxiliary member of the West Side Surf Crew.
I'm not in a lot of different friend groups, you know.
Yeah.
I'm just like almost in, but then I'm kind of just off doing my own thing, or I get concussed surfing.
True, that did happen.
Yeah, so I need to take a break.
But you've gone enough that you're like, you know, you had a hot streak there for a while where you went like 3 or 4 times within like a 2-week span, and then we thought we had you, and it's been a little bit since then, but you're always welcome back.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. It's so much fun, and I love any excuse to hang out with you, including this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, how's your reading life these days?
You know, I've found that when I'm doing positive, happy things in my life, my reading life is active, and when I'm unhappy, I genuinely don't read. So I've been reading fairly frequently recently, and so that means that like life is in a good place.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I almost expected you to go the other way.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I find that when I spiral and things go bad, I'm like, you know, it's too much effort to pick up a book and read it to completion. So I can't do it unless things are in like unless everything else is kind of clicked into my life really well. Then I'm like, oh, like anytime I'm reading or running, like that means that everything else is kind of like mostly taking care of itself.
That's cool. Yeah. Actually, hearing you say that now, it's like, yeah, if I'm going to dive into another world, I want to kind of know mine is on decent footing.
Yeah. Maybe it's like a safety thing of like, everything's fine here. I can like ignore this for an hour, like a couple times a week, and I can come back and it's still not in chaos. But if it's chaos out here, then like this world is also going to be bad.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how mine abides. I think I just read, you know.
You're like consistent through all. You're like a man of all seasons, all times, all emotions. Doesn't matter where you are. You constantly are reading.
I think so, but you know, for that escapism and then that like internal exploration. But yeah, I think it probably would depend on the mood I'm in. Yeah, what am I going toward and why? But yeah, I just find books are a companion one way or another. But hearing you say that, it does make a lot of sense. Like if I'm too anxious, I'm probably not reading with the same level of enjoyment.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the mind wanders and you're like, well, why am I staring at this piece of paper when I should be addressing my life?
Yeah, I find that when I'm bummed out about something, like it's like the book increases the nihilism, where I'm like, my world sucks, and like, not that this world that I'm reading about sucks, but like, it's also not real. You know what I mean? So I'm trying to put value in one of these worlds, and if there's no value in either of the worlds, then like, I'm like, oh, we're all gonna die, and that's bad.
Yeah.
So yeah,
or that's how you end up in the self-help section, you know?
Absolutely.
There's books for those moods.
That's
too.
most of a bookstore in California is self-help for sure. I can't. I tried a few, and it just. I found this with like kind of like Malcolm Gladwell-esque books, where you'll read like a Malcolm Gladwell book, and for like 2 weeks you're like, oh my god, like I'm feeling like the sky looks different, the birds sound different. I've like kind of like gotten this philosophy that he's like preached to me, and then 2 weeks later the spell is broken. You're like, Blink is bullshit. 10,000 hours is bullshit. Like you can kind of do like a couple hundred hours and feel pretty good about something. So I try to avoid the self-help books.
Yeah, 10,000 hours. Lucky for you, rich kid. I got to go to work.
Right? Yeah, 10,000 hours. Oh, awesome. It sounds like you have a lot of fucking free time.
Well, it's like Bill Gates. They're like, yeah, you happen to grow up near the best computer lab.
It wasn't just the best. It was like one of 3 at the time.
Right.
And at the University of Washington, where it's like, oh yeah, oh my, how did this happen? You're like, oh, wow, you got 10,000 hours at a free computer place when there were no computer places.
How did it happen?
Yeah, how did it happen?
Yeah, how was he so close to
that was
all
really
of it?
kind of a slam on Malcolm Gladwell, and I didn't mean that, but I just meant it more in terms of the self-help section of the
He's sold
bookstore.
so many books. I think you could punch up a little and slam on
Nice.
him.
Right.
And also his books, I read a couple back when they were in vogue, and yeah, the feeling is fleeting for me when I read them. I did get invited to see him have a conversation once, and I found him charming.
He's very charming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I couldn't deny it. I was like, he's funny, he's articulate, he's saying interesting things. I think his books are sort of bubblegum, pop culture,
for sure.
pop science, whatever. But it does make me think about something I read this week in a much darker Chris Hedges book. And it was that 1/3, as of 2007, 1/3 of Americans never read another book after high school. And then the number goes up. 42% of college graduates never read another book after college.
Wow.
80% of American homes don't buy one book a year. This is in 2007. I like to think maybe...
Oh, a lot changed from 2007. Like, we really had an uptick. And you're absolutely right. I remember the cultural and literary renaissance after, like, when Obama took office.
When social media came in.
It's been nothing but up since then, you know?
Well, I do think there's...
you can't walk around without bumping into a bookstore or somebody just, like, reading while walking. Yeah, dude, it's got to be a lot better now.
Well, I think because things have gotten so much worse, there has been a reaction to the worst where people are like, okay, my mind is melting into my phone right now.
Yeah.
There are these book things.
Yeah.
Should we try them? That just seems to be this little undercurrent of sentiment I've been picking up, but maybe that's wishful thinking more than it is
I'm
true.
just happy to be finally on an elitist and anti-Malcolm Gladwell podcast. Like, really. That's also, like you said, like a certain percentage of people don't read a book after they aren't forced to. Essentially, that's what the statistic is. It's not really like college or high school. It's like, hey, it's like church. It's like, hey, after we didn't make you go to church, you sure as hell didn't go to church, did you? There's another one that's like, I get it fed on my algorithm where it's like after a certain age, like basically 0% of people sprint. Like no one runs any faster than a jog after like 27.
Oof.
And so I'm trying to combat that too by running more.
Yeah.
You know, like, yeah.
Do you turn it up a little to the sprint?
I try to. We've got a group. You're welcome to join. We're going to run the Santa Monica Classic in September. There's like 15 to 20 of us. You live in Santa Monica, so it's an easy way to get there. We'll run the 10K.
Is this the Venice Run Club or it's your own?
No, the
club?
Venice Run Club is very separate and a lot hotter.
It's hot.
They are very, very hot.
And it's like this is the thing that they do now. And you see all these hot toned people run past you on Saturday mornings in Venice, and you just think, man, we used to just go sit at a bar if we were trying to get laid.
Just sit at a bar and drink beer.
Yeah, and drink beer and hope for the best.
Our club is going to be about 15 to 20 runners.
Cool.
And we're going to go at a conversational pace the whole time.
Love that.
So like a 10K is going to take us like hour 15 to do.
I love that.
And then right after that, we're going to immediately go surfing.
Oh,
So like,
beautiful.
if you want to do that, we'd love to have you.
Okay, yeah, let me think about it, because I have some Achilles issues with all the tennis I've played. And I mean, look, I'm a walking injury. I'm concussed from surfing with you. My Achilles hurts from tennis. From top to bottom, I got a story to tell. But it's funny you calling this an elitist book podcast, anti-Malcolm Gladwell, because that is a reflection on the state of reading, because this is so not like highbrow that we're doing, but just by virtue of the fact that we're doing it.
Right.
I mean, against those numbers.
God. I was a literature major in college, and so it already feels like I'm back in that, because like any point brought up, the response is like, well, if you think about it, isn't that the real point? Do you know what I mean? It's like,
Well, I didn't go to college.
Okay.
So we're balancing out.
All right, continue on.
And there's no snobbery except my own personal vendetta against best-selling authors.
Oh, you don't like best-selling authors?
No, I do. I like them.
Okay.
There's just like certain people you don't have chemistry with as a reader.
Yeah, I get
and
it.
it's not a reflection of who they are, or how good of a writer they are. You just, some people we're drawn to more than others.
I totally agree. I also think that I think the other issue that maybe is like, and some of my book picks have to do with this, is that I think that reading in general is kind of presented as this thing that educated people do, or thing that like, I don't know, you need to have a certain, you need to be like smart and rich to read great books. And one of the things that I've loved in kind of like it started in my late 20s to early 30s, in a derogatory sense, they're called like beach books. But I do think that like shitty, in quotes, like action books are really, really fun. And I don't understand why more people like don't read them all the time, because they're very accessible. And they're also like highly enjoyable, and the effort level is like next to nothing. It's not like you're like, a Jack Reacher book in one hand and the dictionary in the other, trying to figure out like what the hell is happening. You know what I mean? Like, I think that I wish that there was more like, not bro culture, but I wish that it wasn't somehow like, I think there's masculine reading in the world that can be like fun and entertaining and not viewed as like elitist or intellectual, and should be like more accessible to people who they use Netflix for that to feed them. Like, there's just as much Netflix in books as there is in Netflix.
100%. And you still can get that saccharine sweet content that you watch on Netflix, but without the stomach ache in like a metaphorical sense. Like, you truly, that's the premise of this. One of the main things we keep coming back to on this show is like, hey, just read something that's more addictive than your phone. Read something that's fun.
Yeah.
Like, do not read for the name, because that'll just drag you out and beat your enthusiasm down, unless you've built up that stamina and you want to challenge yourself.
Sure. Also, I think that like, in college, it wasn't just like literature. It was Slavic literature and languages, which is kind of like a fancy way of saying Russian, Eastern European studies. And when I was in high school, I would try and read some of these books and get totally frustrated with them, kind of burn out on them, not really understand what was happening. And I also think that some books are meant to be taught instead of read, because they're written for a time and a place and a culture that you might not have access to. And, without that, like, they get confusing quickly. And they also, you'll get frustrated and be like, reading's dumb.
Yeah.
So I think some books need to be taught as opposed to just like.
That's a great point. I mean, I've brought it up a few times on this podcast, the George Saunders book that walks you through how he teaches all those Russian masters.
Oh, cool.
It's called The Swimming in the Rain.
I haven't read it yet.
Okay. Yeah. No, it takes a while, because the Russian short stories are in there, and as brilliant as they are dense. Yeah. And they are a little difficult. It's funny. I read Anna Karenina thinking it was going to be tough, like a lot of the other things I've read. And that was a summer read. You talk about beach reading. I'm telling you, have you read Anna Karenina?
Yeah.
It is pure joy. But yeah, the Dostoevsky's, which even a few of his books are pretty fun and a little slimmer, but some of them much weightier.
Yeah, and a lot of those are like more readable and feel a little more accessible because they were like serialized when they first came out. So you would read, like you'd be like, hey, what's happening in Anna Karenina this week?
Okay.
Or like, Crime and Punishment.
Oh,
or whatever.
interesting.
So it would be like a weekly or monthly. I can't remember, and someone will correct me. But there's lots of like weird parallels with that, like I think it's War and Peace and the Brothers. There's one Tolstoy and one Dostoevsky where they're both writing like either execution or dueling scenes at the same time, and they were like in the same like publication.
Oh, cool.
So you could like compare them as they went on.
Whoa,
and
cool.
like one of the other things with those serialized things is if you read it in the Russian, apparently like Dostoevsky's like grammar breaks down because he's on deadline at like the first couple installments of some of his books are like literally written better because he's like, I have an idea, and then he pitch it and they get it, and then as he's like writing on deadline, it starts to like get shittier writing as it goes on.
Whoa.
That's what someone told me once. So,
no, I've never heard that. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's cool.
I think if I think of Eastern European literature that I've bailed on, I bailed on Dead Souls by Gogol. I got halfway through and I was like, I don't think I could do this.
Yeah, it's tough.
I mean, I like the sense of humor to this piece.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just couldn't hack it.
Yeah, I read it. I remember nothing about it.
He goes around paying people for the rights to their
serfs.
Not even their souls, but just like, yeah, it's almost like when you buy a theoretical share of a stock.
It's like an NFT in the
an NFT
19th century Russia.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And I just wasn't patient enough to get to why he was doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of those are like can feel really inaccessible to like modernize and Americanize as well.
Yeah, and to your point, having someone teach you and walk you through the day and age and all the cultural nuances would make a huge difference. Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of teaching, I'm not asking you to teach us about what you brought, but I am staring at this nice stack of books you got on the table in front of us. Is there anything you want to lead with? And
I mean, I'll lead with if we're hanging out in Russia for a second, I'll lead with like it's my favorite story that's ever been written.
Let's go there.
It's a short story. It's like 6 pages long. It's called Misery by Anton Chekhov.
Okay.
And I'll do a quick synopsis.
Tell me about it.
So it's about this cab driver who's driving like a horse and buggy, a sledge in St. Petersburg, and his son is dead, and he's a sad sack at the start, right? And he picks up 3 fares over like 4 pages, right? And all he wants to do is talk about his dead son. And each one of them, the first one is like an officer, and the officer's like, "Oh, what do you have? You know, blah blah blah." The second is like a group of like young kind of like dilettantes who are like, "Oh yeah, we were getting drunk last night." He's like, "Shut up, you're a liar." He's like, "Oh, you're hooking up with that girl," and he's like, "Haha, my son died yesterday," right? and they're like, "Oh, whatever," and they're like, "You missed the turn," and they like hit him in the head. They pick up another one, he ignores him, and then he goes back to the stable with his horse, and he's just so sad. And then the end of the story is him just telling the horse about his dead son. But not even that. The end of the it's something like, hey, if you had a colt and it died out of nowhere, you'd be pretty sad too, right?
Oh, wow.
And that's the end. And it's like a Russian Pixar short.
Oof.
Where you're like, oh my God, it's a horse, and like, a guy he's going around St. Petersburg in the snow, and people are yelling at him, and then it's got that moment where you're, like the first time I read it, I just like started crying. I was just like, oh no, like those turns in like Pixar movies where you're like, God, it's so fucking, it's the thoughts in her head.
Yeah.
What a great writing. This is great. I'm laughing my ass off, and then you're just like, oh no. Like, life is beautiful and horrible, and it's over too soon, and like we can't really ever communicate how we feel about things. And so it's my favorite book. My favorite.
Wow.
It's 6 pages.
So it's your favorite because it encapsulates everything that it means to be human.
I think it's the largest, fastest emotional response I've ever had.
Wow.
Where it was like, I mean, I read it today. It took like 5 minutes to read, and in 6 pages, you go from, neutral or however you're feeling in your day to just like the saddest thing in the world, like an old Russian peasant telling a horse about how his son is dead.
Oh, just takes you there.
I think it's so beautiful, though.
That is beautiful.
Because I think that, like, you know, so much of, I think all of our existence is like grappling with death or grappling with the passage of time or grappling how we're living in the world. And, you know, this book so quickly is like, shows that even in these saddest situations, we're like longing for some form of connection or acknowledgement, and we'll get it from anywhere. Like, you know, we'll tell it to a wall if we have to, but we need to like express something about life that is not, you know, and if we don't get it from our fellow people, we'll put it anywhere.
Including a horse.
Including a horse.
That's beautiful.
And he's poor as shit, and like no one likes him, and like the horse is sad too.
I mean, we've all been there.
We've all been there on a sledge in St. Petersburg.
We've all stared despair in the face at one point or another.
And that face was a horse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you're lucky to have a horse sometimes.
Yeah. I also think that, like...
And that's the little hint of comical consolation, right?
I mean, he's not lucky to have a horse in this instance. The horse is a bad horse, too.
Right.
But, like, I think the idea that I grapple with is that everything can be horrible, like really, really horrible. And still, like, there's, like, this humanity in it of, like, I still need to, like... I need to tell you this.
I want to tell my story.
Yeah, I want to tell my story, or I want to connect with someone.
Yes, or I want someone to make it feel a little better.
Yeah,
right.
And I also, it kind of hit me in a time in my life where, like, I was really excited about studying literature from this area of the world, and all of the examples that everyone kind of knows are these like sprawling masterpieces across 1,000 pages, and this was just like 6 pages, and I was just like, wow, what a powerful like writer to be able to like evoke emotion in me 120 years after the fact, and have me be like at my least emotional moment in my life, which I think for men is like 22, 21, where you're kind of like, well, I'm a man now and I have to like act like a man, to just read for like 10 minutes and be like a wreck. And then think about it all the time, you know?
Wow. He got you.
He got me. He really did.
The power of literature.
The power of literature.
Well, Chekhov is not only timeless, he does almost feel like he's of your time. You know what I mean? Like, except he's too smart.
Yeah.
But there's a feeling of like,
he's like a small moments guy where you're just like, oh, like the moment, but the moment of a sad father is the same throughout history.
That's a Facebook post length.
Yeah, it really is.
Right?
I mean, it's a see more on Facebook, but like, you know, it's definitely a Facebook post length. You'd be like TLDR, like,
yeah,
my son died. I'm real sad. Talking to a horse.
8 likes.
Right. Like if you agree.
One sad
Share
sad
if
emoji.
you want me to say something to the horse. But it's like, yeah, I think it's
very easily that could be an Uber driver.
It's immediately relatable.
Posting on Facebook.
Absolutely.
In the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Or talking to his Siri on his phone.
Like, we've all been in an Uber where the guy's like, hey, this is my music. And you're like, oh, here we go. You know what I mean? Like, we've all had moments. I was in an Uber. I've told 3 people this, so I'm so excited to tell you this. I was in an Uber coming back from the west side to my place in Venice, and we're kind of really close to my spot. We're like a half a block from my spot. And he turns around and he goes, hey, man, does the Earth revolve around the moon? And I was like, he asked it in like such an innocent way. And I was like, the moon revolves around the Earth. And he was like, then why can't I see every side of the moon? Why is there a dark side of the moon? And I was like, well, if this is us and this is the moon, because the way the moon is spinning, it's like this, like the axis is pointed at us. So we're not seeing it, and we'll never see it because it's going like this around the moon, right? And I did that, and he went like this. all right, cool, man, thanks.
Wow.
He was just like this had been bothering him for years, and he was like, I'll ask this guy.
And he knew, he found the right guy. I couldn't have explained. I just learned something too.
Right, but the way he said cool, all right, it was as though he was like, all right, I'm going to sleep tonight.
It's about as existential and simple of a moment as you can ask for in life.
Yeah.
I had a similar thing in New Orleans once, this Uber driver. He was telling me about the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, but he was bragging about it in the most deliciously beautiful language and going on this tirade of, I think he was in Iowa, but sitting in his car eating a meal between two lakes. The sun was going down behind one lake and the moon was coming up above another lake. And he was adamant that it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, but that also I had never seen anything more beautiful.
I mean,
and it was, and
that's like a best-selling novel. Do you know what I mean? I'm like, if you could figure out how to like contain this feeling in words.
I actually halfway through took video of it.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I think I'm hearing something incredibly special. And yeah, I still have it somewhere on an old phone because yeah, you're right. It truly like these very human moments. I always say like, our society's in trouble when our rideshare drivers stop promoting their side hustles to us.
Yeah.
That's when we're in a real hopeless place.
I mean, I feel like that's a larger conversation about the gig economy and how we classify workers,
well,
but sure.
What do you want to say about it?
I don't want to say anything about it. I do want to share one other thing that happened in Uber that made me think of, like so intensely about this.
Okay.
Which is I was in Omaha and I was getting the hotel shuttle from the hotel to the Henry Doorly Zoo, which is a fantastic zoo. If you hate zoos because they're cruel to animals, this is like the least cruel one. So we're driving and this woman was like, "Where are you from?" And I'm like, "I'm from Los Angeles." She was like, "Oh, I've never been there. Are you close to the water?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she was like, "Can I tell you about the first time I saw the ocean?" And I was like, "It's all I want to hear." And she was like, "It was my 40th birthday." And my husband, in the middle of the day, was like, "It's 18 hours to get to North Carolina. Let's drive and look at the Atlantic Ocean. We've never seen it." So they drive through the night, taking shifts. And she said this phrase. She was like, "And we're getting closer to the ocean and I can smell it. I can smell the salt. And then I can kind of see that the trees are disappearing because there's nothing by the coastline. And then I saw the ocean." And then she said, she was a larger woman. She said, "This big old girl from Nebraska sat down and had herself a cry."
Wow.
I was like, oh. I was like, I'm going to go see some monkeys now. It was great, but it was like a moment like this where you're like, I can't believe that you let me into this, like, this moment of vulnerability.
Yeah.
I would never do that.
Well, all centered around transporting.
Yeah.
Right? Like getting people across space and time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a more profound act than we give credit to,
Sure.
I was a Lyft driver when it first came out.
Glory days.
And they made you affix a giant furry pink mustache to the front of the car. And it's funny, I get like these class action lawsuit letters sometimes for jobs and gigs I had, and I'm always like, are you going to give me one for the humiliation I suffered with that mustache?
Right. Yeah.
And all the looks my poor little car got.
We're almost so far away from that like new passengers in Lyft wouldn't believe that they used to do that.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It's like that's as distant as like when you and I were growing up and we were like, "Oh, we'll meet here at this time," and then it just happened.
That's where we're at, huh?
Yeah. That's how far that time is in an Uber.
Well, and I sort of signed up because I was slightly under the impression it was like this community thing where you're like, yeah, if I'm going across town, why not give someone a ride?
Yeah.
And oh, how I was wrong.
I mean, it was that for a second, and then it was
they
just
sold
like,
it that way.
Yeah.
And they got that was like right when we were at this peak millennial idealism, like, yeah, maybe we can use business to change the world.
Right, because they didn't want taxi drivers. They wanted you.
Right.
They wanted a better experience.
Right.
And then just like the mill of capitalism ground them into like, the same thing as taxi drivers.
The same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I got to feel like they led with that friendliness.
Did you work there when there was some glitch where like for first-time drivers, if you were like available for X number of hours a day, you'd get like a daily bonus or something. And there were all these like hacks to work around where it was like, well, if you just turn it on for like 5.5 minutes and then you turn it off, you'll get $50.
Right. It might have been around that time, but I've never been good at landing into those like hack moments or even paying enough attention. Cool. I'll read about it a month after it happens and be like, okay, no one told me about that. I was more concerned with finding a bathroom, and once in a while you get a date from the ride, and that was...
Oh, really?
Yeah, that was
like
cool.
A dating app for you?
Yeah, a little bit.
I mean, that's for, 6'5" handsome dudes,
in my late 20s,
Yeah. I remember you then. You were incredibly handsome. So I think that kind of would have worked in most jobs for you.
Yeah, well, you got to work with what you got. Well, cool. I mean, that's an amazing first book. I love Anton Chekhov. I've read most of his plays.
Yeah.
One of the masters of short stories, clearly, and you walking us through that, and then all these memories it awakened in us in riding in our buggies, our modern buggies, pretty amazing.
I think it's so relatable, and I think it has to do with those small moments like we were talking about, where
Well, it is a little forced humanity, right?
Yeah.
Getting into an intimate space with another person, whether it be the expectation of the driver in your story, hoping someone will hear him, or us now getting into a car and the same thing with a person we'd never encounter otherwise.
Also, whenever I read this, I read this probably like once a year just because I love it so much and it takes 4 minutes. And every time there's like a half-life of how open I am afterwards. There's like for 2 weeks after when I hop in an Uber and somebody's like, hey man, how you doing? I'm like, great, dude. How are you?
How are your kids?
Tell me about your kids. Are they living? What's your favorite thing about being a dad? Do you know what I mean? Like, or whatever the fuck what made you want to make this terrible music that I'm listening to right now? And then sure enough, like within 2 weeks, I'm like, I'm on a call.
Yeah.
Like,
silent mode. Yeah. Well, I don't ride. I do not like ride shares. At some point, the understanding that my life was in the hands of an untrained stranger. Yeah. Especially because I've been that untrained stranger driving people. I just haven't been able to go back. But I ride the bus, as you know.
I ride the bus now too because of you.
That's pretty cool.
It's great.
It's the one good thing I've done.
I mean, we're fortunate being on the West Side that like it's both practical and not as perilous as it seems as in other places.
Not as much. I rode from Santa Monica down to Long Beach the other day.
Wow.
Took the Expo downtown to Pico. Then I rode the A line down to Long Beach. And
how long did that take?
That
hour and
took
45?
2+ hours.
Wow.
Yeah, with the wait. But there was a guy selling tasers on the train to and from Long Beach for $40, and he would spark them up in the air to show you they worked.
Wow.
And I think if I had cash, I would have bought the taser.
Really? What was he charging for a taser?
$40.
What he
for
needs
the
is
large
another
ones,
guy to start
said.
mugging people, like
honestly,
like a 3-card Monte game where the guy's like, I'll bet.
Or just literally threaten us, and he goes like, do you want the taser? Do you want the taser?
Right.
And then one guy did buy one. He took it out of the box, and I don't know. He described it as the large ones. We've got the large ones, and they did look pretty large and hefty. So yeah, I don't know.
Did you ask to see a seller's license?
No, and yeah, I mean, I'm in support of entrepreneurs.
Sure.
Yeah, so I hope. I don't know. Do we even edit that part out? I don't know. I think he'll be okay. Yeah. There's got to be an awareness that this goes on, right?
That there are tasers being sold?
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay.
I think that, do you mean edited out of the podcast?
Yeah, I'm like, do you
feel like you're like snitching on this guy?
Am I selling this guy out?
No.
Yeah. Okay.
I think the cops have much...
It's common knowledge.
Yeah, and I think the cops have much bigger things that they're doing nothing about. So like, you know, like they're not doing anything about that either.
No.
Yeah.
But the conversations you hear on that train, speaking of, it almost feels like theater. Two guys talking, then another guy chimes in because he can't help but speak his piece after overhearing them. And yeah, just once again, the forced humanity, like being brought together in an intimate environment.
Are you 100% mass transit and or bikes?
Yeah, so I'm married into a car. My wife does have a car. So if we need to take our dog to the vet or go on a road trip, or if she wants to go somewhere and
in a car.
Yeah.
You have that car.
We'll do that.
Cool.
I do find myself becoming more and more averse to even riding in one. I don't make a big deal of it. I try not to be a public transit snob.
Yeah.
But I just do genuinely prefer public transit and riding my bike and walking at this point.
I think it activates a different part of your brain.
Right.
That's what I like about riding the bus, is that you're on a ride you're passive instead of active.
Yes.
And you're like, your passive brain, I think, is more stimulating to yourself. Like, you don't have to pay attention to anything.
Exactly.
You can kind of pay attention to the stops, but like, also I think your world when you're driving is mostly here, a little here, but I think your world when you're riding is like
360
here to here.
That's right.
So you just kind of see the city differently.
It's interesting because you're right. There's that passivity, but then you also feel like you're on an active adventure too.
Yeah.
You're like seeing things at street level. Like you said, 360, you're taking a different route than you would normally. Even the bus, the height of the bus.
Yeah.
I rode it along Sunset Boulevard and I could like see over the hedge of some of the mansions in Beverly Hills and like could see into their yards. And just like these little glimpses that you wouldn't get otherwise add up to, a feeling of adventure.
I do wish that there wasn't kind of, in LA, mass transit, I think, is viewed differently from the non-rider than other cities.
Oh, yeah.
It's definitely viewed as like much lower socioeconomically, and also like, well, you must have gotten a DUI, or you can't drive, or you wrecked something bad is associated with it. But I think it's like a real cheat code to kind of like, I don't worry when I leave the house and walk to the bus stop. Like in my car, I'm always like concerned about other drivers, parking, all of this stuff, like parking. Not that parking is going to like put me in the poorhouse, but it's always like there's like a timer on things that isn't there when you're in the bus, where you're just like, well, yeah, I'll grab the bus. When it comes, and I'll get there when I get there.
And it has its frustrations. You find yourself waiting for one that doesn't come, or whatever. But yeah, it does. I'm chipping away at this book called Paved Paradise about how parking explains the world. I haven't gotten too deep into it.
Big Joni Mitchell fan. That
yeah, exactly.
That author.
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. Put up a parking lot. And there's like one parking scientist who's like renowned at UCLA. I think his name's Donald Shoup or something. And he says like searching for a parking spot activates the primitive, like reptilian parts of your brain, the fight or flight mode, right? Like it takes you there, just finding a parking spot. And I know that feeling. People won't leave their homes because they have a parking spot that's a nice one, and they don't want to lose that parking spot. And that stops them from living.
Yeah. I also think that self-talk is important. And when you're behind, like the thoughts that I have when someone gets in their car and I'm waiting for them to pull out of a spot and I can tell that they're on their phone checking something beforehand, and that's not on them. This is on me. But like the awful thoughts that I have about people in daily traffic is also not healthy.
It's not healthy.
And when someone comes on the bus, like there's a little bit of stranger danger.
Oh yeah.
But sometimes there's like, it's just like, hey, all right, these Australians didn't know that we don't really ride the bus in LA. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like it's just a different, it's a different antenna.
Antenna.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is another issue, is the anger. Like, hey,
there's a lot of anger in
I am not
former.
who I am behind the wheel any other time in my life. Once in a while on my bike, if someone tries to kill me or doesn't try, but they're still going to maybe kill me, yeah, the anger comes out. But that's actually probably a healthy response. That's going, hey, my life is in danger.
Yeah.
And it happens in cars too. But some of the things in cars, like you're saying, it's not about danger. It's about the fact, and my theory is you actually just want to get out of your car.
I agree. I also think that there's a projection in cars of you should be doing this the way that I would do this.
Right.
Like, hey man, you can turn right on red. Like there was enough space. Like you should be performing this how I should be doing it.
Right.
And when you do not do that, it makes me hate you. Whereas in a bus, it's kind of like we're all doing the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, we're all engaging with this in the same manner. Also, sometimes I think like buses are like a more fun ride. Like they really fucking fly, and it's like a lot of fun to be like, well, all right, like,
yeah.
this all goes south. Like we got a pretty good lawsuit on our hands. You know, like
when they command that bus lane, you're moving at a rate that no one else is.
Yeah.
And it feels like you almost catch the lights on a better timing too.
They've got to be salaried drivers, because if they're hourly, I'm like, guys, like slow down, like get a little more pay out of this ride. Like we're fucking moving.
Yeah.
The other cool thing I've seen, I was on a bus that stopped short and a guy hit his head. A guy in the passengers hit his head and he had like a little bloody nose. And the bus driver was like, we got to stop, everybody out. Sorry. He's bleeding, so I have to file a report. And nobody was like, what the fuck, man? Just drive the bus. He's fine. He's got a bloody nose. People get like, everyone was just like, all right, bus is not moving. They just like filed out and waited for the next one.
On to the next one.
And I feel like in a car, that interaction is different.
You're stuck with your car.
Then you're like, then you have an aggression about it. You're like, fucking pissed. Everybody's mad at, you know. But there it was just like, oh, well, the ride shut down.
Another bus will come.
Space Mountain's closed. We got to go to Thunder Road, you know. So yeah, I love the bus.
All right, good. Well, public transit podcast coming next.
Dude. You should do it.
Yeah, why not?
Different bus lines and your ratings of them.
Yeah, right.
I think it'd be great.
Yeah, well, so, okay, that's where Chekhov took us.
Yeah,
do you have any follow-up to that you want to get into?
I really don't, man.
We could go in a totally different direction.
Where do you want to go?
I mean, I'm looking at Carthage Must Be Destroyed.
This is what I'm reading right now.
Okay, yeah, I like that. What's current?
Cool.
What's
so I'm like 100 pages into this.
Yeah, how's it feeling?
It's feeling great. I totally recommend it. It's a book written from the perspective of the Carthaginians, a little more than the Romans. So it's basically like, you know, I'm in a bit of a boring section of it, if I'm being totally honest. The beginning of it is like the sacking of Carthage, and it's like the greatest fucking action movie you've ever read.
Wow.
Like the queen of Carthage sees that her like husband has betrayed her with the Romans, so she like throws her children into a fire and then jumps into a fire. Like it's like end of the world, amazing.
Wow.
You know, apocalypse stuff. And now it's kind of like this kind of dissection of Carthaginian identity through artifacts and pottery, which is like not exciting. But it's interesting. It's, you know, the whole history is written by the winners. We all have like a perspective of Carthage as more of a Roman Greek perspective, and this is just more of a Carthaginian perspective, and I totally think that you should check it out. Yeah,
I mean, I'm just like having to probably confess that I'm not entirely sure where Carthage is
like
on the
Tunisia.
map. Tunisia, okay.
Yeah, so it was settled by the Phoenicians, and they became like, they had outposts kind of all over the Mediterranean.
Got it.
And kind of like, you know, before Jesus, so don't really need to pay attention to it, but like, you know, it's enough. And it's kind of like a view of the Mediterranean world from the Carthaginian perspective. And they got involved with fighting. There were a couple different Punic wars that they had with Rome, and then Rome was like, we're getting rid of Carthage. And they like leveled it, salted the earth, like a town of like 80,000 people, like killed everyone or enslaved, basically like wiped it off the map. And so it's, I think it's a solid book. I haven't finished it, but.
And all that's left is the pottery to tell the story.
All that's left are like the shards of the pottery. They also did like human sacrifice, like sacrifice of children. But this is also like another moment where I'm like, I don't know where it's going to land eventually. But some of it's like, oh, we didn't sacrifice kids. We sacrificed kids that had already died. And then as things got worse, they were like, we got to kill a couple kids. You know? Like, they're like, all right, it's not working. Like I know this is going to sound crazy. So it started as like, I'm so sorry about your son. Do you mind if we like, you know, like take care of him. And they're like, sure. And then things got worse, and they were like, we got to kill your son.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's
and that was how it came to. That was what came to pass.
That was what came to pass.
I mean, I've had a thought recently, like, why do I expect the gods to smile on me if I don't sacrifice anything to them?
I mean, that is a very, like, that feels like a very pagan, like, if I do this, this will happen.
Yeah.
You know, very...
An attempt at control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so do you change your behavior based on that?
No.
Do you have like a relationship with God or gods or spirituality?
Well, I just read Parable of the Sower.
Cool.
Have you read it?
No.
Octavia Butler. It's like takes place in 2024, California, dystopian, very grounded. She wrote it in 93, realistic look of what things could be if things fell apart because of climate change and just, infighting and late stage capitalism. But she has these beautiful passages in the book about how God is change. And that idea I just think is so simple, but so cool. So that's what I've been turning over in my head recently too. It's just God is change, and you shape God through the change in your life and your behaviors. And it's kind of the only guarantee. And but do I have God in my life? I have that
didn't need to be a genuine question.
No, but I do have a conversation with the spiritual realm, whatever that is, the invisible world.
Yeah,
I would say, yeah, cool. I do. It's an ongoing conversation.
All right.
Often
one-sided or
one-sided.
Okay, cool. All right.
And mumbling, incoherence.
All right.
Coming from me. But yeah, I do think about sacrifice in previous cultures and even the current one we're in now. And what do we sacrifice? We sacrifice to the altar of something. It's probably just like capitalism or whatever. Bing, first use of capitalism. Made it 30 minutes. Not bad.
That's good. Does it usually come up faster?
Yeah. It's just it's a catch-all for what I believe are a lot of the ills in the world.
Yeah.
Obviously it's more nuanced than that, but this is
How
the
do you
internet,
feel about
baby.
being a cog in said capitalism?
A lot of impotent rage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what can you do, right?
Yeah, just find realms in your own world to explore that you can. Whether it be your imagination or whether it be your physical world, you go surfing every morning, like, hey, until that sea is completely contaminated with DDT and sewage runoff from the Bologna Creek, like hop in. And there's a sense of freedom.
Make hay while the sun shines.
Make hay while the sun shines. Read a book. Go back and to find untold stories.
Publisher.
By a publisher.
Yeah.
No, I mean, there's no clean exit. I mean, even that surfboard you're on and the wetsuit that I'm wearing and the whatever, it's like that's coming through the same system. But there's degrees, it feels like.
Yeah. Sometimes I'm the general manager at the West Side Comedy Theater
in Santa Monica.
In Santa Monica, my friends and I own it, and sometimes I kind of say like, "Hey, we're making this is an artistic decision, or this is a capitalist decision," and nobody likes the capitalist decisions. The capitalist decisions are like, "I really like your show. You can't do it again here." Like, why? Because like that's the system we're in.
Yeah,
like we just can't afford to do that.
This is how we're feeding ourselves.
Yeah. And then, artistic choices are like welcomed with fanfare. Like it's like, oh my gosh, really? We can do that? I'm like, yeah.
That's cool.
As long as it doesn't become a capitalist decision, in which case we will not do it.
Just make sure you get some crowd work into that show. Get some crowd work comedians in there.
And also, this was just in my bag because I'm reading it. So I didn't mean to pull it out.
No, I actually kind of love when our guests bring a current read.
Yeah.
Because it's a great launching off
I'm getting a
point.
little bored with the pottery, if I'm being honest. Like, I read a bunch of the Game of Thrones books. And there's, like, the character of Bran who's constantly, like, dreaming. And after a while, I was like, I can't have this motherfucker take up more of my time dreaming. Like,
not another three-eyed raven.
Yeah, we're here for dragons and sword fights,
I felt that way with watching the show, too.
Yeah.
And then it didn't pay. His character really didn't pay off.
Not at all.
In any kind of way.
Yeah.
And his journey did not explain itself. So yeah, a real shortchanged session there.
So we're talking about capitalism. This is a good segue into this book called The Wager
by David
Gran. It's by David Grant. Yeah. It's about British ships going to sea to capture Spanish gold, and everything goes wrong, like absolutely everything. And it's kind of like during a time when, God, if you could think of there are obviously, we could do a mental exercise. There's lots of worse times to be born, but to be on a British ship in like the 1600s is like one of the worst, most horrible things you could ever wish for somebody.
On a physical level, on a
physical level,
social level, on a hierarchical level.
It's the worst. It's like you go, you're basically in like, it's like North Korea, where like such a like the captain is so powerful, and like everything's falling apart. The boat is actively being eaten by like termites. It's like everyone's getting scurvy. Like it's just the worst thing in the world. But I would recommend that book because they're turning it into a movie, and I'm a big fan of like reading books not like once they are movies, but in that great period before they come out. Get them before. Yeah. Because then you're like, I think that the big appeal of books like this and like some of the kind of like beach books are that most books, when you read them like that, you're just watching a movie in your head, and you have a really clear idea of who's cast, what everyone looks like. And I love having that and then watching a movie and realizing how it's changed. Yeah, that's making me think of the experience of reading and how it like really brings up through the author's written word these symbols in your brain. Yeah. Even if the character never has a face, it's a very particular character to you for whatever reason, whatever detail, whatever voice you hear when you read this character's words. And like you're really kind of formulating your own like little Sims world in your brain, which is so cool to see how broad or intimate the landscape could get in there. And then, you see the movie, and you're never going to not see Jeff Goldblum as the scientist in Jurassic Park. Right. But he may have been nothing like that. Like nothing like that in your brain. And but then what also happens is you forget the world that your brain created with the author. That's why you got to get it in this, it's going to be, I think they're starting production on it or something, and it's going to be out probably like 2 years, say. So it'll be fresh enough in 2 years that you can be like, great. This is how I saw it. This is how they saw it. What do I think they did well? What do I think, like, where did they falter? Yeah. Like, where did they, include things that I didn't think needed to be included for the things that I love about this book? Like, there's a thing in the beginning of this book where they talk about people being pressed into service by the Navy, and it sounds like the most horrifying thing in the world, where they're just like, so you're wearing like a t-shirt that a surfer would wear. Like if that were the case back then, they'd be like, all right, you like grab him. He must be a surfer. Except it's with living on a boat for a year, where they're just like, you look like a sailor, and you're like, I'm not a sailor, I'm a bricklayer. And they're like, you have tar on your hands, and he's like, this is from bricklaying, and they're like, they don't use that for that, and then they just grab you. Or you're like sick in a hospital and you wake up on a boat because they were God. Grab the sick people, they'll get healthy on the boat, or they won't. Either way. Oh my God. So that'll probably encapsulate like a shot or two, maybe like 10 seconds of a movie. But that to me is like the imagery I have around being pressed into like military service in the 1640s or 50s or 60s in England is like the whole movie. Forced consignment. Well, like, the Russia-Ukraine war, Russia was giving prisoners the option to leave prison to go to the front lines and be cannon fodder. Yeah. And it's like, the world that exists when hierarchy dominates like that is insane. And probably a lot of these people were innocent who went to prison, sure. Like, I don't know about Russia, but maybe. I feel like there's a bit of collective guilt over there right now. But like some of these people were just like, they were like homeless. They were unhoused 1640s people in England, and they were just like, grab them. And I think that is like, there's so many elements of this book that are just like absolutely riveting, and it reads like an action film. And you also kind of, it like backdoors like knowledge about the sea and sailing, which I always love, and I love books about the ocean, and I can't recommend it enough. I bought it for like 5 people already.
No kidding.
Yeah.
The Wager.
The Wager.
It says a tale of shipwreck, mutiny, and murder.
All of it.
What else do you need in a sea adventure?
It's also got, and this is something, there's a moment in the book where they're on like they're in South America, they got fucking crashed on the shore, right? And the indigenous people come and help them. And like they're freezing, they're dying, all of the stuff. The indigenous people are wearing like loincloths, and they figure out how to have fires on their boats, and they figured out all these things. And they're like, all right, everything's going to be okay. And then some English guy like fucks one of the indigenous people, and like, then they leave. And it's just that moment of they were going to save you. And I'm sure that they'll like, I think there's humor in that moment too.
Right.
And I hope that however they capture it in the film captures like, not from the perspective of the British people being like, yeah, let's do what we want to do, but just from the indigenous people being like, we're about to like get you out of this whole fucking mess.
Yeah.
And you're fucking this up actively.
Right.
And I think there's like a humor from that perspective in there.
Well, the daft callousness of Europeans, especially Europeans questing for gold. And I mean, just the pure selfishness of it, and the ruin that is like so evident spiritually. And you at the beginning, it said, speaking of capitalism, Is this like ship almost a microcosm of that? Like what made you think of that?
Not really. It's more like global warfare, early like proto global warfare, colonial. Where it was like it's like England is in competition with Spain, and in order to like basically Spain has like a bunch of treasure ships that come, but one big one every year, and they're like, well, if we take that, then it'll impact this over here. So it's a little more like geopolitics and like one of the earliest world wars.
Okay.
And short answer, sure.
Yeah, I mean it says mutiny, so to me it's like, are we overthrowing the boss here?
Yeah, there's definitely mutiny,
And when do we get to that point in our society?
I don't think we're going to, because life is too good.
Yeah, the comfort level is still a little too high, isn't it? For most people. I think
if we didn't have iPhones, it would be different. And not for the communication, just from the like feeling like, Also, there's like that whole like Horatio Alger, like you can do whatever you want in this country. That isn't true, but like I think the feeling of it is
right. There's enough toys that make you feel like you are. You get on your jet ski, you get on your dirt bike, you go hunting for the weekend.
And like speaking as like a definitely like lowercase e entrepreneur, like it's really challenging. Like it is difficult to run businesses, even small ones like the ones my friends and I have. And I think that like, I don't know how other people like do it.
Yeah. Like just make it work, you mean?
Yeah. It's really complicated.
It seems like it. Well, and it seems like a very difficult particular moment to do that.
Sure.
Yeah. Or are you just saying universally running a business is hard?
You're talking about like overthrowing the powers that be, right?
Oh yeah.
Like when
I just got invested more into your personal life suddenly, so I lost the overarching thing. The
overarching thing about like, oh, when are we going to throw off like our corporate masters? It's like what I'm saying is like the alternative is really fucking tough too.
Really tough.
Really tough.
A lack of comfort.
Like if you're like, I'll make my own thing. Like that's like my friends and I opened a bar. It's called Inkwell Tavern up in the Valley last year.
Burbank, right?
Burbank, yeah. And, the one thing we always laugh about is like just, oh yeah, you get why these all fail. Because it's really tough.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's endless. We call it doing laundry with our clothes on. Because you're like, God damn, we just finished the laundry. And then you look down and you're like, fuck. More laundry, so it's like relentless, and it really is a grind. And so I think that there's comfort in the system, because if you were to like my dad worked at AT&T for 33 years. There was never, there was times where his job was in peril, but there was never like there was never like, hey, AT&T rent's due.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, at least in his position in the business.
Well, and that's when the comfort level felt almost reasonable.
Yeah.
Where there was a steady feeling of stability, upward mobility, and it feels like that is like really vanishing now, but maybe not fast enough, like you said. It seems like there's still enough of it. Like you said, we have our iPhones, we have our toys. You know, yeah, I don't know. I look at the political landscape and I'm like, okay, yeah, no, people aren't ready. But yeah, I do think.
What do you think they're ready for? What are you foretelling?
To make the landing softer would be starting to build community together, starting to build feeling trusted networks of people who do things, have skills, have land that they grow food on. You know,
you want to like, you're talking about like stripping it down to the studs.
Yeah.
Like I got to find a bunch of people that, and some of them can grow food, and some of them.
I'm either starting a cult. No, I mean that's the way.
Yeah, the sexual abuse is like like 2 doors down from what you're talking about. We're like, yeah, if we just get enough people, we can like grow our own food, and like, yeah, I'm in charge, but I'm not going to do anything like weird. But I do like having multiple wives.
That's the ruling. That's the ruler's way of looking at it. It's like, of course, the exploitation's around the corner. It's like, well, I don't know, because we've been trained to think that, someone wants to exploit someone at the end of it because that's what capitalism does. But it's like, or I don't know, what if we all just like got along? And when we didn't, like it wasn't someone's finger is on a red button that ends the world.
But that works in small groups, but it can't.
Yeah.
It can't work in the scale that we're talking about.
Yeah.
You know, like
the scale must change.
But like communism works in like, you know.
Oh, I'm not saying communism though.
Well, you're kind of describing.
No, I'm just saying reducing hierarchy.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm not saying that there's a system I see out there. I will say you read about some indigenous cultures and you're like, well, it seemed like they kind of had the idea of caring about each other at the forefront. Is that idealizing people of the past because people are people?
My knowledge base on this is, in terms of like comparing this to indigenous cultures, is not as deep as I'd like it to be to really like jump into this. But like, not everyone was friends before we got here.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Not everyone were friends.
Yeah, once again, not idealizing previous people, but just looking to the idea that, hey, there are pre-existing solutions to treating each other better.
Right.
And there's future ones. Will we get there? I don't know. I look at my iPhone most of the day.
Right. But I think kind of what you're describing is like the other side of the coin of libertarianism. Do you know what I mean? Like you're kind of being like, well, what if we all like, we don't need all this structure and stuff. And I still think for like the society to function there, you know, like I personally think libertarianism is like the laziest of political ideologies. And you're kind of saying not that, but it's like, it feels like maybe it's on the other side of the horseshoe from libertarianism, where it's like not leftist communism, but it's kind of like we're breaking down enough hierarchies to make us all feel comfortable with the work that we're contributing to make whatever we've built work, right?
I mean, that sounds good. Yeah.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Right. But I just think like there's a moment where it's like,
have you met people? Is that what you're asking?
No.
Have you met people?
No, there's a moment where it's like, we need an airport. Do you know what I mean? Like,
right.
We need a road. We need these things that our own sorting can't accomplish.
Yeah. Well, you know, the roads in this continent, they were built over trails that were already here.
Sure, but not the important ones.
I think so.
No, not the interstate system.
I think so.
It was built over
native trails.
I think that's true of like some areas, but I don't think they were like, where should we put I-80? And they were like, well, of course, the trail from coast to. I just don't think it was like that. I agree with you. And in fact, I read this book that was about the founding of the Northwest, like the very first kind of like encroachments into the Ohio Valley, where they were like, the Ohio River Valley, where they were like, it's beautiful, and there's these wide open spaces in the middle of the forest where deer go, and you can just shoot them. And you're like, no. Like, that was cultivated hunting land, you know? Like, so I agree with you that there was obviously like cultivation of the land, agriculture, all of that stuff. But to the original point of like, how do we break down hierarchy? I think it's like, I think you can kind of only do that from the top in this country. You know what I mean? Like you can be like that CEO that was like, hey, everyone, I forget his name, but it's like everyone makes $70,000 a year.
Yeah, you want to forget his name because he turned out to be a little sus.
Was he bad?
Yeah.
Oh no, what'd he do?
Yeah, I think he was just a little sus from some of the. But then again, you go, or was information put out because someone was trying to break it down?
So what side of this are you on then?
Trust no one.
Trust no one.
But learn to trust everyone. No, I'm not on any side. I'm trying to explore alternative ways of like how we could treat one another. Does that mean I'm like actively, building those ways? No, but I think the beginning part to things is like contemplation.
Look, let's just talk about Jack Reacher real quick. If that's cool.
Yeah, let's do it. You were talking beach reads.
Beach reads.
Let's finish on
totally
beach
accessible.
Reads.
I think that like the world would be a better place if everyone read a couple Jack Reacher novels.
For what reasons?
Because I think it's about like getting your head out of the screen, and I think it's just as entertaining as like, it's exactly like an action film.
This is a Tom Cruise starring movie eventually, right? He played Jack Reacher?
Yeah, he did play Jack Reacher.
In case people have never heard of Jack Reacher.
He played it in two. So there's like 30 books. I've read about 25 of them.
Okay.
And one of the things that the author said, that Lee Child said, was like he was tired of reading novels about flawed heroes. Like to give another example of like a flawed hero, like what's the Dan Brown book about?
The Da Vinci Code.
The Da Vinci Code. Like he's like this brilliant symbologist, but he's like so scared of tight places, or he's got like, so there's something wrong with them, right? Like, oh, I'm great at everything except for this flaw that I have. So this author was like, I want a character with no flaws. All he does is like kick ass, and then he both treats women with respect, but also like all women like him. Women like him, men want to be him, women want whatever that saying is. And I think that it's like I've read enough of these books that I both am convinced that I could write one, but also that I think it would be as satisfying as any movie version of it for people who aren't normally readers.
Yes.
And they're also cheap. They're like $9. It's like an airport book.
Yeah.
So I wish that more people read books like these because they're like funny, action filled, all that shit.
I love that. I told you I just read Parable of the Sower. I knocked it out in a week. I loved every second of it. And previous to that, I was thinking, man, I'm a slow reader. And it's like, no, you're just pushing through some pretty dense nonfiction that you're enjoying. Yeah. But that's not a story. Yeah. And story really propels you. I mean, my dad, he wasn't a reader, but he was this, dorky psychiatrist who read Vince Flynn's spy novels.
I read Vince Flynn's spy novels. They're great.
Yeah. He couldn't get enough of them.
They're like, what they are is they're just like, you like read it and then you go like, never need to think about that again. It is zero impact. It's just something fun to do.
Yeah. And I mean, that's just it. And reading is a momentum. So if you start with things that get your momentum going, that do some of the heavy lifting for you, that's a beautiful thing. Thinking about a perfect character, a flawless character, are we saying he just always makes the moral decision?
Everything. Every aspect. So he's always like...
How's his diet?
I mean, he loves black coffee.
No sugar.
No sugar, just black. He's 6'5", 250 pounds, all muscle.
Louise.
Big guy. And he always does the just thing, the right thing. I mean, he kills hundreds of people. But like they're all bad and deserve it. It's like there's no... Not that there's not thought when I read them, but there's no like moral questions. There's no like, I don't know what to do. Repeatedly, at least once in every book, he headbutts someone. Okay. And it's always like, no one expects a headbutt. And like, I think that that's valuable for people just to have somebody who's not like wrestling with anything. Yeah. There's no like deep questions. Yeah. He rolls into a town. Some person's in trouble. They have some loose connection to his past. He solves the problem, usually under covers in the 100th town in America, some international crime ring, destroys the crime ring, kills everyone, has sex with the deputy sheriff, who also happens to be incredibly attractive, but also like treats her right, and they both understand, like, you know, Jack was in the army for 30 years or 25 years, so like he just wants to walk around America. You know, like he doesn't even have clothes. He goes to a thrift store and buys like a new pants and a new shirt every once in a while. So it's just like this, like, you know, character and conflict without wrestling, without moral wrestling, without like, oh my God, is he going to win? Of course he's going to win. It's Jack Reacher.
It's Jack Reacher.
So I think that as a simple kind of like first step into reading books purely for enjoyment, not because like, well, I'm supposed to read this book, you know, or this is a book that people who are intelligent read, so I can have whatever it is, like, or I'm learning, it's nonfiction, and all of a sudden I'm like, why do I care this much about, you know, Johnson's, you know, term after Kennedy was assassinated? You know, like, it's none of that. It's just like, yeah, go have fun, watch this guy kick people's ass.
A wandering vigilante. With a heart of gold.
Right?
But fists of steel.
Because, Josh, think about it. Don't you sometimes wish that you didn't have all the thoughts that you had?
Absolutely.
That's what this book is.
Yeah.
It's no thoughts.
A to B to C. The world is one way or another.
Do you like fights where there's no, like, worry about that you did something wrong?
I do.
This is the book for you.
You got me.
He also loves music too, so there's like a lot of
a soft spot.
Came to this town to check out this blues bar where this guy used to play, and apparently this is the center of methamphetamine trade for the southeastern American United States. You know, so I think it's worth looking into books like that.
I love that. You start with Chekhov, you end with Jack Reacher.
Yeah,
you've taken us around the globe.
But
on ship.
With the wager.
Chris Gorbos, I've just appreciated everything you've had to say. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Betty.
Yeah. And yeah, you are funny.
Cool.
See you later. And to everyone else, thanks for listening, and happy reading. Thank you for listening to another episode of Turek Books. Be sure to like, subscribe, thumbs up, any kind of thing that could help us get listened to or watched by more people. We really appreciated having you, and hope to see you again next week with a new guest and plenty of books. Take care until then.